welcome to Shift F1, a podcast about speedy race cars. I am Drew Scanlon. Joining me, we have Rob Zachney. How are you, Rob?
Doing just great. Missing Danny, but doing just great. My heart will go on.
Danny O'Dwyer is on assignment this week. If you are new to this podcast, there's usually three of us, but we used to get along with just two, so I think we'll be fine. Danny, you are missed. If you're new to Formula One itself, we've got an episode just for you. Our preseason primer assumes no prior F1 knowledge and explains how the sport works and who everybody is. So if you'd like to go back and listen to that, get up to speed, so to speak, on Formula One. And then you will understand everything that we say in this subsequent parts of this podcast. You can go listen to episode 216. Also, the show is supported entirely by our audience over at patreon.com/shiftf1, where every month we release bonus podcasts and videos exclusively for our patrons that cover racing documentaries and films, F1 video games, experiments with other racing series, and a lot of weird things. So if you would like to support the show and get access to all that fun stuff, head over to patreon.com/shiftf1 or click the link in the show notes. Rob, we just recorded and posted our IndyCar primer, which is sort of doing the same thing that we do every year with our F1 primer, but for IndyCar. I had a lot of fun recording it.
It was a blast, and I'm glad we timed it when we did, because it was just in time for a very good Long Beach GP. So it was a great show and a great time to get into IndyCar.
Yes. But we would be remiss if we did not mention our title sponsors over on Patreon. There are many tiers that you can join, but these folks have joined the ones that get their names read out on the top of the show in alphabetical order, starting with special characters. We have at Talking Autos, at Team Blackjack, hashtag Bunny Crimes, Abdullah Althani, Abraham Getchell, Alex Goucher, Alex Medina, Bailey Foot, Circuit Demon, Drew Stewart, Gordy's Army, Umberto Roca, IronStation.dev, Irvine Clinical Research, Jason Chadwick, Jason Kelly, Kick Aha of the Art, Lachlan the Madden Man, Max Voltar, Michael Maves, Olivia Evans, Snigs, Cyphus Training, Turf SCS, TelemetryDeck.com, Tiger Wood, Troy Stammer, and William Rompf. Couple of new names in there.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone who supports us on Patreon. This episode's a little different because we are in the gulf of no F1. We're right in between. We're right where China should have been.
Yeah, this never happens, and that's by design.
Yes.
Like, this little dip in F1 activity does not exist once the F1 calendar gets rolling, except for the 3-week break.
Right. It usually happens in the summer. I'll bet Formula One is pretty peeved at this because, beginning of the season, they're coming off of that Drive to Survive high that they get every year when it releases just before the season starts. And to have it kind of dip right now is like, really killer to the momentum. But we are going to hold it down with some news and some emails. So join us, won't you? We're going to start with something, a follow-on story from the Australian Grand Prix. Carlos Sainz crashed into Fernando Alonso during the final standing restart. If you haven't watched that race, boy, there was a lot going on. We did multiple standing restarts. In one of them, Sainz, as I said, crashed into Fernando Alonso and was issued a penalty, a small... relatively small 5-second penalty, but because everyone was bunched up at the end of the race, he fell from 4th place to 12th, effectively last of the runners with a 5-second penalty. And he and Ferrari went back to the FIA, the governing body behind Formula One, and requested a review of the penalty. Sainz especially said that it was just way too harsh, especially because, as we pointed out in our post-Australia episode, the whole thing was mooted because that incident was effectively erased by them resetting the grid for the final restart. But that's not how the stewards think, and the stewards have summarily dismissed this request for a new hearing, saying, quote, "There is no significant and relevant new element which was unavailable to the parties seeking the review at the time of the decision concerned. The position is therefore dismissed." First of all, Rob, what do you think of that?
I mean, they've had this position before, right? Like, it was like when Red Bull wanted to relitigate the Silverstone incident a couple of years ago with Hamilton. They tried to get around this like dictum that you have to have new evidence for hearing if you're going to reopen a ruling, and they tried to get around that by having the then on reserve Alex Albon stage the.
Oh my God, that's right.
That's right. Like he tried to stage the incident again in an older model Red Bull F1 car. And from that data, they were trying to suggest that, proved conclusively that Hamilton couldn't make the turn, et cetera. And F1's response was, this doesn't constitute new evidence. It's not like it's a recreation after the fact with different cars. It's just not it's not germane to the ruling. And since there's no new information the stewards lacked, we're not going to revisit that. So they've been consistent on this. I think what's going to be really grating for Ferrari in this case is a lot of what this seems to come down to is they feel that the stewards rushed the decision, right? They didn't give Sainz a proper hearing. Usually drivers do get a chance to plead their case before the stewards, before penalties are handed down. That didn't happen in this case, which raised some eyebrows. So it's one of those things where I think from Ferrari's perspective, the ruling was improperly rushed to begin with, and so to have F1's response be, well, we can't, there's no new evidence here. Why would we revisit it? That's got to be very frustrating because the entire point is you didn't give us a proper hearing the first time out, and they do have some grounds for complaint here, right? We watched that video. Gasly was as at fault for what happened in the final restart and all those cars going out. He's not at fault for taking out his teammate. That was, well, he's a little bit at fault for that. But he was also like not driving up to standards, when the incident occurred. And so, to have the more lenient penalty applied to him and, because they sort of walked back from like giving him a race ban because of his license point situation. That's right. It's got to be annoying for Ferrari to get this response.
Yeah, and they did submit more data, so, like Sainz onboard data, and I think maybe a statement from him. And they also tried to establish a precedent with a previous event. I think it was Felipe Massa and Sergio Perez coming together in Canada. And that was kind of thrown out too as like not relevant. So they did their best. Ferrari says after the fact, quote, "We are now looking forward to entering broader discussions with the FIA, F1, and all the teams with the aim of further improving the policing of our sport in order to ensure the highest level of fairness and consistency that our sport deserves." So good luck with that, Ferrari. Well, from a Ferrari-centric story to a Red Bull one, Rob, we have a grip of stories here. How do you want to kind of summarize this attack?
Yeah, honestly, so you opened with you mentioned just now that this sort of touches on Red Bull, and I think it's no surprise right now. Like a major topic of discussion from the start of the season has been Red Bull dominance. Is Red Bull going to just straight up run away with the championship this year? Are we going to see race after race of Max Verstappen, driving off into the sunset with like 20, 30-second leads, unless some act of God happens and then Checo drives off into the sunset with massive leads? Are we going to see a season like this? And one concern that you've heard about that is there's all these new fans that F1 has who don't remember the good old days of Michael Schumacher and Ferrari making for several snooze fests of F1 championship duels for years there at the at the turn of the millennium, and they missed out on arguably the most dominant Mercedes years, right? Like that, you have a lot of fans getting really into F1. Maybe they watched like the 2020 truncated season where Mercedes kind of owned that thing from beginning to end. But it wasn't too long after that you started to see their dominance get pretty thoroughly chipped away at. You get some real pressure on Mercedes, and so one argument has been that if Red Bull is inaugurating an era where they're just like running away with the sport, is that going to turn people off of F1? F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali has sort of poo-pooed that concern. His argument is that these fans will stick around, and that F1 has in place rules that are going to mitigate some of the competitive disparities we see. So, I'm very confident with the budget cap, this situation will evolve in the best way for better competition. And he kind of argued that it's actually F1's hardcore fans that are probably more frustrated with the lack of cut and thrust at the head of the field. He said it's more for the avid fans that if you see a car that is dominant, that's creating a level of less interest. For the new market, the new fans that are coming into the business, this is not really very important.
I think especially because of the way that Drive to Survive has, introduced those new fans in a lot of cases to the rest of the field. It's not like you're coming into that old era and you're just, the TV cameras are only following the car that's in first, and that never changes, right? Like, that is a tough sport to get into, right? And this sport was tough to get into, even when we started this podcast. That's the whole reason why it started, is like, there's a lot of onboarding here. Let's kind of learn about it together. And so I think I kind of agree with him. In that or at least I can see why that might be the case, because there are already, if you come from Drive to Survive, there are already more things for you to look out for.
There's a tension around this. You hear the discussion in other sports as well. I follow this a lot with, this comes from around basketball, that for years the NBA has pursued this idea of parity across the league, which is kind of following in American football's footsteps, where the entire thing is designed that to kind of even out results between teams and not create too many like perennial winners and losers. Now, that can't save you from dysfunctional franchises, as lots of people know, but in theory, at least, there's nothing structural keeping teams from getting good after a run of bad luck. And the NBA has sort of publicly striven for this goal, and that hasn't been matched with greater interest, which has been sort of a concern for the league. Why is it people seemed more invested in the NBA when you had a couple super teams that were dominating things, and it was just kind of a question of like which of them would come out the champion at the end? Why is it that when you have a much more dynamic and engaging field, you're not seeing fan interest engaged much? And part of the argument that I've heard advanced is that, it's easier to generate narratives when you have a clear front runner and then a clear underdog or two that's chasing them. If you get to a place of, on any given Sunday or on any given race, it's anyone's ball game, it does get a little bit harder to sort of hold in your hand, like, what is the state of play here? Which I think you could sort of see on our IndyCar primer, right? It's like, there are teams we like, there are drivers we enjoy, but it's actually very hard to make any sort of definitive statements because the fortunes can swing so wildly. It's so rare you see truly dominant runs like this. So I think Domenicali might be onto something when he says this. But having said that, I do think as a situation goes on long enough, I think it does become a concern, right? Like right now, yes, like a lot of fans who came to F1 and we'll get to this next, like, a lot of these folks came in through Drive to Survive. It's what we call the Drive to Survive effect. And that is a documentary series where, you know, it covers the grid. But let's be real, right? It's a series that's had two major protagonists, Gunther Steiner and Christian Horner. Mm-hmm. Like, that, those are the two perspectives that show loves. And so if Red Bull's doing well, that is kind of what some of these people who've been brought into the sport have signed up to see, right? You know, they want to see Gunther being a lovable weirdo, and they want to see Christian Horner being a, you know, cold, competent killer. And right now, the sport is delivering. Now, whether those people would watch 4 seasons of that, I don't know. But that kind of does bring us to, well, what are we talking about when we talk about the Drive to Survive effect? And you pulled some interesting stats here from, you know, the Athletic ran a story about this, trying to sort of pin down the overall impact of Drive to Survive. And I was actually sort of struck by this. We can go through the numbers here in a second. I kind of thought the numbers would be bigger, Drew. Like, they're not bad. It's impressive growth, but at the same time, I'm sitting here, and it was like also kind of a reality check, right? Where sometimes I feel like we talk about this Drive to Survive effect like it is F1's the new national pastime. Yes. And like, no.
Yeah, one thing I didn't get from this article was sort of a comparison to other sports here. But there are some really good stats. Apparently, there was a 40% jump for this season's debut of Drive to Survive from the previous year, which equates to 570,000 viewers for its first week. Total Season 5 debut week viewership, which includes people catching up on all the prior seasons, was up 35% over the same period. But I think what really the number that I was looking for and that they provide in this article is that of the new fans, how many of them came into the sport from Drive to Survive? And this article, they polled, or it's a separate entity polled 1,900 adults in the U.S. and showed that 53% credited Drive to Survive as a reason that they became viewers of F1 races. I think that's a lot.
That is a very effective. That's
when you're talking about the number of people that have onboarded to Formula One, right? Half of them did so because of Drive to Survive.
And the other half was because of our podcast.
Exactly.
So, you know, pats on the back.
250,000 weekly viewers.
Yeah, I mean, did they get into anything, like, did they get into, like, age demographics in this as well?
No.
Because this is the trend right across all of sports. Again, we alluded to this a bit in the IndyCar primer, but to make it sound like an IndyCar problem is not really accurate. All existing sports with like legacy audiences have struggled to really break through with younger audiences. This is just across the board. And so I'm curious if the Drive to Survive effect has also been that, you know, where a lot of other sports are fairly moribund in terms of drawing in younger audiences, has F1 managed that on the backs of the show, which would make these numbers more meaningful, right? You know, because that's the sort of the seedlings of the next generation of F1 fans. But like it's significant growth compared to where it was. You know, you pulled the US TV viewership when Drive to Survive began was a bit over 500,000 people tuning into each race, right? Mm-hmm. And now, like last year, we were a little over 1 million people tuning in each race, or like 1.2 million. But that's still not a huge audience. You know, this is still it's a much bigger niche sport, and it's got to like win behind it. But it's this is not the next like NFL. And so like if this growth trajectory continues, that's very exciting. My suspicion is, and I saw some things where this came up when, man, Domenicali must have given a lot of interviews, because I felt like I saw like 5 or 6 stories that were centered on Domenicali quotes about various things. He was talking about the Brad Pitt F1 movie that Brad Pitt is making right now with Jerry Bruckheimer, and he was sort of making the argument that Drive to Survive isn't going to drive new audiences to F1 forever. And so we need to find other vectors to reach people that Drive to Survive hasn't, which I think is probably correct. Like I am curious how much more juice is left to squeeze out of Drive to Survive. Certainly after 5 seasons or whatever, our interest has waned a little bit in what that series offers up year on year. Doesn't seem like that has happened with the audience that actually watches it on Netflix, but eventually these things do tend to plateau, and we all know what happens when you hit a ratings plateau, as the movie Network taught us.
Yes, indeed.
The Symbionese Liberation Army kills you on air. That's what happens. So with this groundswell of F1 enthusiasm right now, we've covered before on the show that there's a lot of people, particularly the Andretti Autosport, who want to start a new F1 team and join the sport in time for sort of the new the new regulations in 2026. And that bid has not, like, particularly the Andretti bid, has not been enthusiastically received for a variety of reasons. But one of the other big things in play is that there has been a lot of denigration of the idea that F1 should want or need an 11th team, and that if anything, F1 should charge a higher anti-dilution fee for new teams joining the sport. Now, this was coming from some of the team principals, as regards the anti-dilution fee, which, for people who haven't heard about this before, some years back, F1 sort of set a rule that if someone were to come in and launch a new F1 entry, becoming an 11th team on the grid, they would have to pay $200 million to the grid, effectively. $200 million spread across the existing teams to compensate for the diminishment of value of their teams that the 11th team's entry would represent. At the time, it seemed like a backbreaking amount of money, that it was going to keep a lot of otherwise, potential interested entrants out of the sport, because standing up an F1 program just to begin with is a wildly expensive and fraught endeavor. To front load it with a $200 million fee seemed like it would pretty much string razor wire around the F1 paddock and keep anyone who wants to come in out. Well, now you see so much interest, it's clear that the $200 million fee is not discouraging anyone from trying to fight and claw their way into F1. And the response from the teams has been, well, maybe we should increase that fee. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, obviously, is, it is greedy, but it's also well-placed greed. Like, the franchise is more valuable. The value of an F1 team is more valuable than it was back then. And so, to a degree, they want the price, to reflect that increase in value. But there's also a bit of protectionism here, where the teams want to make sure that it always makes more sense for someone to pay an existing team an exorbitant buyout fee than to start their own team, right? They want, like, as long as there's any team on the grid that's like, maybe I could sell if given the right price, they want to make sure that right price is offered. Mm-hmm. And a way you can do that is you just keep jacking up that anti-dilution fee until, like, people are like, I'm just going to buy
Sauber's looking pretty good.
Sauber's looking great. AlphaTauri, not interested in the sale. Put those rumors to bed. Don't put it out of your mind. AlphaTauri does not want to sell. Don't know where these rumors are coming from. But, on the other hand, who needs two F1 teams? Maybe someone is. I think all this stuff is in play. I wouldn't be surprised if Gene Haas, even setting aside some of the potential legal dramas that may be about to unfold for him, I would not be surprised, given the evident cheapness of his effort over these past seasons of Drive to Survive, if he wouldn't see selling that team for a large amount of money as a pretty good return on the investment. Overall, these things are now legally forbidden from spending more than $130 million a year. So Domenicali finally came out and said, as the CEO of F1, basically that he's on board with this. And until, with his vote sort of out there in the ether, it wasn't clear that, was just a few teams that were kind of advocating for the fee to go up and trying to chase off the newcomers, or is F1 going to kind of change the rules around this? And Domenicali said, I go back to one point. The so-called anti-dilution payment was done at $200 million just a couple of years ago, because at that time, no one would have expected that the value of this business would rise up so much. Today, the situation is totally different, for sure, and it's our duty to make sure we protect the business the best way that we can, and we have a bigger picture. He was asked, about Andretti Cadillac. He said, today there's so many that would like to come. There are teams that are more vocal than others. Some of them are much more silent, but they're really expressing their interest. That is the one part of this that you often hear when they're sort of explaining why we just don't like this Andretti fella. We're not sure about this bid. But, we have all those other bids that you don't hear about that are very serious. We're very excited to work with these silent bidders. And that's probably true to an extent, but also there is a little bit of I'm logged in on my laptop to my eBay auction, and I'm maybe placing some bids on it. There's just whenever I hear that, I just get a little bit of a vibe of maybe they prefer business be done discreetly, in this way. But I do sometimes wonder if the interest is as, rabid as they make it out.
Yeah. Well, before we get to the last news segment, I did find some very rough numbers for what other American sports average per game. So we said F1 is at 1.2 million per race. Basketball, 1.5 million per game. And there are a lot more games.
Yeah.
Hockey, 500,000. So F1's between...
Also a ton of games.
Also a ton of games. F1 more toward the basketball.
Yeah.
But again, 22 rounds this season. All right. Final news story here, Rob. Mercedes. Rounding out the top three teams here.
It just cracks me up that... So, the Mercedes garment rending tour continues. Toto Wolff gave an interview to Autosport where he explained that the Interlagos win last year that Mercedes sort of unexpectedly got, we had that great sprint race. George Russell, got it done in the sprint and then got it done in the race to sort of, notch a victory in that otherwise terrible W13 Mercedes. Wolff has said that entire victory was the perfect storm for Mercedes that would cause them to double down on the fatally flawed W13 concept for the 2023 season. He said it got better and better. We were competitive in the American races. We won in Interlagos. We knew that Abu Dhabi, is a bit different. That was the perfect storm for us. It wasn't good for 2023. We thought we were on the right track and the concept works, but it didn't. Last year was tough because we didn't understand it. It came as such a surprise that we put the car in a zone where it wasn't generating any performance. In any case, not performance that we thought was important. And this year, the second year of the regulations, there's a lot of evidence about what went wrong. it's a decent interview. Like it's worth reading. But at the same time, I just want to call out, we gotta stop calling things perfect storms when they're just like routine fuck ups. Like, and I think maybe that might be my issue, is that every time someone like accidentally ties their shoelaces together and face plants, like if they're a managerial type, they stand up, they dust themselves off, and they're like, let me tell you what, that was the perfect storm of me humiliating myself. That was just who could have foreseen that? And frequently it's like, well, these are really routine things that can and frequently do go wrong. Didn't require any real special circumstances at all. Like, for instance, Interlagos, was that a perfect storm? Well, there was a storm involved. There's a rainstorm in Interlagos that kind of threw things into chaos a little bit during qualifying, but it's an unusual circuit. There's some unusual things about it, just in terms of its profile, its altitude. Like, I think when you call it like a perfect, it's a really exculpatory phrase, because it kind of suggests that there's so many factors that nobody could have accounted for what the outcome of these decisions would be. And that sounds kind of good until you come back to the fact that, like, they had a really bad car all last year. And then after beating their heads against the wall, they get one win out of it. And they make some gains across the year. They get one win. And that,
I think, we've solved it.
That high, they ride it through the off season, and they're like, you know what? I don't think we made a bad car after all. Maybe we made a great car. We just, it was just such a smart concept. It took us a whole year to figure out like how to make it work. But surely next year will be different. And so, like, I don't know. It's it's very funny to sort of see these excuses offered up. Like, these sorts of, like, the margins are so thin, small miscalculations can have massive impacts. Absolutely. But I'm just cracking up at the way that, like, Mercedes processing setbacks is just one of the funniest damn things. We have so fascinating. We have the, like, 6-page letter to fans. We have at the end of last season, Mercedes being like, we are going to send a tiny copy of the W13 to every single person who's ever worked at Mercedes. They can contemplate what a garbage car it was and be motivated to be better. And then they double down on it, and then they're like, damn, no way this could have happened without some crazy things happening to derail our thought process.
Man. All right. Well, those are the news stories. Let's take it now to emails. So next week, we're going to have our pre-Baku episode. Danny will be back joining us again. But until then, we don't have a race upcoming to talk about. So we solicited some emails from you all out there in podcast land last episode. So we've compiled a few of them here. Rob, why don't you kick things off? Oh, and by the way, if you'd like to send in emails, we also read them on pre-race shows. Shift+F1podcast@gmail.com or f1.cool/emails if you would like to send in your own email. But yes, Rob, let's kick this one off from Maria.
All right. By the way, Drew, if there's an actual answer to this that that I'm eager to hear it, because I actually don't know the answer to this, but I have theories.
I have theories.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for your podcast. As an F1 convert from Drive to Survive, you've helped me understand the nuances to the myriad race rules over the past few seasons. This is a small, silly question, but since we have a 3-week gap, which will result in an email roundup episode, it feels like the time to ask. Why does Toto Wolff sit indoors and not at an outdoor pit wall during races? Is it because he just gets to do whatever he wants, or is there more to the story? Thank you for your service, Maria. So, when I look at this, I have a couple theories. I don't know what the definitive answer is. One, Toto Wolff is a banker. Like, let's be real. This is a business. This is a businessman, right? Like, he loves the F1 stuff, but I do think he is more of a creature of the C-suite than your typical F1 team principal. And so to a degree, sitting back there in the garage, we can keep an eye on the whole operation, both sides of the garage in eye line. He's got his little squawk box. He's listening to all the team comms that are happening between the departments, and he can get eyes on the pit wall, across pit lane. And so to an extent, I think that kind of makes sense for where does he see himself in this? He sees himself there, not on the pit wall. That is execution oriented. He sits here and just sort of watches it unfold and intervenes where necessary. That is kind of my theory.
He is strategic, not tactical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of chalk it up to a difference in management philosophy. Do you lead from the front, or do you empower your subordinates to do their roles? I think Toto is very much the latter, whereas someone like Christian Horner is always up there on the pit stand. How much their actual moment-to-moment roles differ, or how much does Christian Horner or Toto Wolff weigh in during a race? I have no idea. Tough to know, without being in on those ground loops. But yeah, that's kind of what I took from it.
Yeah, I could also see it being just a more comfortable place to do that job from. More comfortable setup, and maybe the things he wants to be able to see and touch would just take up too much real estate on that pit wall. I could see there being a practical element too, but yeah, it does seem like a philosophical positioning of the self here.
Surprised he doesn't have more screens. He should have one ultra wide monitor and then one vertical ultra wide monitor.
Well, remember, both walls of the garages are covered in monitors. So now, I suppose if you're precious about viewing angles, that's not optimal, but he can kind of turn left or right and I think see a whole bunch of race feeds.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I would love to just mess around with what kind of input switching do they have? What kind of can you turn up each individual audio track to hear?
When I saw this question, I was sort of wondering, is there somebody in Mercedes IT or comms or whatever department who hates that he does this? That they have to wire up an entire endpoint that can get across all comms. That's in the middle of the garage, away from the actual command center. I do kind of wonder if this oddity puts any weird pressure on signal flow and just layout of the communications channels. But yeah. I it has me thinking of, you ever been to that website Apollo in Real Time? No.
They basically have taken every audio recording from each station in mission control and the spacecraft from Apollo 11 and maybe 12 and 13, certainly 11 and 13, and kind of play them all in real time. And then they overlay pictures from it, video from it, and whenever that piece of media shows up in real time, that's when they play it. I really want something like that for Formula One. I know no team would ever agree to that, but it is amazing. I will put that in the show notes.
Oh, this is sick as hell.
Oh, it's really cool. Apollo 13 just happened on April 11th, and I watched the liftoff in real time. But you can
see,
you can start it whenever you want. Yeah,
this is we got to get away from the crap internet that the e-shitification internet that yes. Everyone's building, and we need more weird projects like this.
Yeah, shout out to Bill Schmidt at Digital Eclipse for passing that one along. All right, next email. This one from Dusty Bacon. Hey shifters, I started watching F1 after watching Rob play Motorsport Manager and then playing a truly absurd amount of Motorsport Manager myself. I started the 2022 season from the first race and worked my way forward until I eventually caught up to real time. In the Barcelona race, there were 5 to 10 laps where George Russell held back Max and Checo in an obviously worse car. This was the first time I thought to myself, wow, that driver is doing something special. Do you have a race or driver or moment that sticks out in your memory as the first time you went wow from when you were new to the sport? Thanks, love the pod, Dusty Bacon. So I have a couple, one specific and one more general. I remember early on, when you don't know anybody and it's all just different color cars out there, you do kind of latch on to stuff. And maybe in the future, if you had seen that same move, you would have been like, whatever. But because you're new to it, it imparts so much more gravity on you. I think that's why I became a big Valtteri Bottas fan, because I was watching him in a Williams car and they weren't as bad as they were. This is 2014, I think. They weren't as bad as they are now then. But I remember like seeing him do some cool move and go like, that was cool. It's just what you're describing, Dusty, is like, okay, I know enough to know that what he just did was impressive. And now, because I noticed that, he has imprinted on me, and I'm a Valtteri Bottas fan forever. A more specific memory is, I think I talk about it a lot, but Max Verstappen's first, his drive in the rain at Interlagos, where he just ran circles around everybody. That became clear to me that like, oh, this kid is for real, and is definitely going to be a championship contender one day. I think it was his first season in a Red Bull. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think I might be hazy on the details, but I have a vivid memory of there being a rainy race, I think at Monza, and Rubens Barrichello got in the lead, and I want to say maybe never got off slicks. But there was a race where like the conditions were really spotty. Like one of those things where it was like sunny day raining, off and on, throughout a bunch of the race. And it was one of those races where like it sort of seemed like Barrichello should not be able to do this, on the tire strategy he was on, and yet he was doing it. He was sort of running away with this race, where there's kind of no margin for error. And it was so in defiance of expectations that I was kind of sitting there and stunned that he pulled this off, because it was one of those things where you always needed rain tires back then, and he just kind of threw the standard tire strategy playbook out the window and showed no signs of slowing down, despite being on the suboptimal strategy. So now it's possible in retrospect, in those kind of like damp conditions, that it wasn't as impressive a feat as it appeared to be, but at the time it certainly seemed like he was pulling performance out of a car that would have been really in really challenging conditions. So that was kind of one of those moments where I was like, this is a special drive.
Cool. You want to take this next one?
Yeah. Hey guys, given your experience in both gaming and racing, I'm curious to hear your opinions on the recent situation with IndyCar, iRacing, and motorsports games. Back in 2021, IndyCar and MSG, the company behind the much reviled recent NASCAR games, announced they would be partnering to release a proper IndyCar game. Last month, iRacing announced that IndyCar would be pulling their license from the service to honor an exclusivity deal with MSG. Although iRacing users can still race the IR18, iRacing is no longer allowed to use IndyCar branding or run races of the car at official IndyCar tracks, including the Indy 500. Players are also barred from uploading video or of streaming iRacing races using the IR18.
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
That I had wondered, because I heard about like a bunch of this, and I thought there would be slight inconveniences associated with this, like maybe no sort of like you couldn't run a virtual Grand Prix of Long Beach or something in iRacing. I had no idea you can't run an actual race with the IndyCars on an IndyCar track. And your community can't create content doing IndyCar shit. It's wild. Anyway, all of this happened shortly before news broke that MSG has delayed the IndyCar game to 2024, as well as news that MSG's current financials are looking extremely dire. It feels like a slap in the face to me as an avid fan of IndyCar and iRacing. I can't say I appreciate Indy's choice to pull their license from the most respected sim racing service in favor of taking a check from a company on the edge of bankruptcy that is only known for poor quality games. Love the pod. Keep up the great work. Jake from Houston. Yeah, sounds bad, Jake. Sounds bad. I think the thing that really surprises me here is it is just such a torching of good. Like, go back to 2020. Yeah. When they couldn't run races, they went to iRacing and managed to put together decent broadcasts that they also turned into a celebration of like IndyCar past and present, right? Like having old guys show up to, put their little sim rigs in their house and like take part in iRacing, getting guests like Lando Norris to come and drive with the F1 guys till Simon Pagenaud decided to be a dick. And like, it was clearly a really successful and close relationship, and the drivers were authentically fans of this game. Like the drivers use this as a resource, and the drivers use it as a community, as a way to sort of build community. And to shred all of that because we need our F1 series like F1 has via Codemasters is and you're not dealing with Codemasters. You're dealing with a company that's like, what's your track record? And it's not good. It's shocking that you would do sort of a shitty licensing deal that is very much of a piece with like something you expect from like the late 90s, right? Where it's like, I don't know, you want to give us a few grand to do a Xbox 360 exclusive, like official game that like is going to be total crap. Sure, we'll let you do that. It floors me that IndyCar blew this relationship up.
Yeah, it does strike me as sort of that a complete lack of understanding of like video games and their communities. But I would kind of understand that from a company or a body that hasn't been in it for a while. Clearly it was just, this was the lowest bidder, right? And they were like, okay, sure, the kids love video games, right? Like that's how this strikes me. And it's just, yeah, you're right. It's a shame.
And they should then do a carve out. I think that's the other thing is then like, because the thing is, even if MSG were a reputable developer, and it just sounds like they are not in the sim space, but even if they were, we talked about this before, iRacing is a different animal. It's a different, it's not iRacing is not in competition with like EA's F1 series being made by like former Codemasters. Like they're different experiences entirely. So I also don't know why you would give this sort of broad exclusivity where you can't even use the car model and the appropriate tracks. Even if MSG was going to make a great IndyCar licensed game off of this, iRacing existing and doing IndyCar stuff wouldn't have been a threat to it.
Yeah. All right, next one here from Katie K. Hey guys, I'm a Peace Corps volunteer currently serving in Albania, and I'm a big fan of the podcast. I love listening to your discussions and analysis of the races, and especially as F1 is not very popular here, and I have yet to befriend anyone who follows motorsport. It was surprising to me that F1 isn't more popular in this part of Europe, considering over 40% of the cars in Albania are Mercedes, and every day I see at least one person wearing a Ferrari-branded tracksuit. However, anytime motorsport or F1 happens to come up, people eagerly tell me, did you know they're building an F1 track in Albania? I didn't. It seems a few years ago, Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama had a meeting with Jean Todt where they discussed improving the country's road safety rules, and afterward Todt said in an interview the FIA would theoretically support an initiative to build a motor park in the country. Since then, Prime Minister Rama has promised his supporters that he will, quote, bring F1 to Albania, and there are plans to build a track in Elbasan. I try not to bring up all of the many reasons Formula One probably won't be coming to the third poorest country in Europe anytime soon, and just lean into the excitement of maybe being able to attend some FIA event before the end of my service. If races didn't require a country to have unlimited time and money, what new places would you guys like to see F1 go? Marup Fashim from Albania, Katie. This is a great question. I really wanted to see that Vietnam circuit go off. It was so weird.
Yeah.
It was like it was kind of like the Mercedes symbol. It was like a central point and then like 3 weird spokes out from it. Very bizarre. I would have loved to see that. But yeah, what do you think, Rob?
Let me tell you about a little nation called Malaysia, and and a circuit they have there. Now, like truly new places for them to go. I don't know. Maybe it's 'cause, like I love when there's lots of like dramatic elevation changes, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, we've already seen how good Interlagos is. I think we just got to get one of these things in like Colombia or something. Again, just like throw a track down
the Andes.
Yeah, just like absolutely like maybe right on the verge of feasible too, right? Mm-hmm. Like it'd be great.
I'm trying to think of good like Cruisin' USA or Cruisin' World locations. Atlantis, I think, would be good. Maybe like the pyramids, you know? That'd be a good backdrop. Literally anything on the continent of Africa.
Yeah, that would be cool. I think there's like the one thing is, of course, that I also suspect that F1 showing up to a place is also a very good way to ruin said place. Like like as much as I'm like, man, wouldn't it be cool if they put a track somewhere, and then immediately you're like, wouldn't it be cool if we just devastated the environment for like miles around this like iconic location and to like jam an F1 race in there, and like we took a beautiful like natural geological like structure and we just like regraded that shit to make it compliant with like F1 safety regulations. So, you know, I think the one thing I always bear in mind when it comes to F1 is like, it's so easy to do fantasy bookings for F1, and then the reality is so often complicated just because like running an F1 GP is such a involved process, and there's so many compromises baked in.
Yeah. Do you want to take this next one from Edward?
Yeah. Edward writes, Hi, Shift+F1 podcast team. I wanted to ask you guys a question about the governance of Formula One. As a fan of most North American sports, I'm used to the league being in charge of itself, typically through a commissioner or similar figure. However, in Formula One, we have the FIA, which seems to play a more prominent role in the sport's governance. Could you guys break down the different responsibilities of the FIA in Formula One and how they work together or don't? I've also noticed some tensions between the two organizations recently, and I'm curious if it's possible for Formula One to leave the FIA altogether. Do you think this is a realistic possibility, and what would the ramifications be for the sport if it were to happen? Thanks for your time, and keep up the great work on the podcast. Best, Edward. Okay, so basically, FIA is a sporting regulations body, and it is a car industry standards body, lobbying body. It's like, this is kind of the weird part of it, where like theoretically it's a federation of like automotive clubs and bodies that are sort of worldwide. And so it has like road safety responsibilities. It does things with like the actual like auto industry that touches on cars that like normies drive. So that's another big part of the FIA's brief, is that the FIA is concerned with like all things cars worldwide. Formula One is a business structure built to run and administer Formula One racing, sell media rights against it, distribute prize money, etc. And so the two, it really has been sort of ne'er the twain shall meet situation because fundamentally they are two organizations that are built to do different things. There is going to be tension between them. One is that, having a body of referees and officials that are outside the sport is always a recipe for trouble. But as you allude to, like, could Formula One break up with the FIA? They could, but actually I don't think they want to, because I think, one, all these things that they have to hash out, all of that would suddenly become an internal pressure cooker inside Formula One. Right now, they can sort of come together as a group, and the teams can come together and discuss things, and then they lobby the FIA to change the way they do things. And there's always a little bit of it's someone else making the call ultimately, and so we do not have this notoriously fractious body does not have to come together and reach consensus around a lot of regulatory issues. The other thing is that these are not teams that want to do regulatory stuff. If you say we're breaking up with the FIA, okay, well, are you going to then take on responsibility for administering all the open wheel feeder series that you're drawing talent from? Because if you don't do that and you leave the FIA to sort of handle that stuff, but you'll have the pro league refs that are managing things for you. If those things start diverting and you start developing the college football, pro football split for your incoming drivers, that gets really complicated. It gets really messy. Just think about all the things that F1 as an organization would have to develop competency in to replace what the FIA is bringing to the table.
Circuit safety,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the thing. So what do we mean when we're saying Formula One, sometimes called FOM, Formula One Management. So what are they all about? Well, why does it exist this way? Because you have to remember that in the primordial ooze of F1, this was such a fly-by-night, rich man's club. This was horse racing, man. It was people showed up with their teams. Here's my racing team. Here's the car we built, and we're just going to go racing. Is this even... Not every race F1 raced at was an F1 race. There were sanctioned events and non-sanctioned events. Yeah. And to this day, everyone's I don't know, how do we regard these things? How do we regard the results for these things? It was so loosey-goosey. And that created some real problems later as TV rights became a bigger and bigger deal, because there became questions of who was getting rich off this, and then what is F1? Who has the rights to sell TV rights for F1? Is it the people putting on putting cars on the tracks? That was a pretty good argument for what the team should be enriched with all this revenue that was being brought in by TV money as the sport became fully international and televised. And so sort of the foundation of modern F1 is the really ugly, almost sport destroying disputes over money in this era. This is how Bernie Ecclestone, who is increasingly a figure of the past, but he is sort of the founder of modern F1. This is how he got control of it. Is that he sort of, I'm going to bastardize this history a fair bit. It's much more complicated, and I never fully understand it myself. But he sort of got everyone to bundle together, all their rights, their negotiating power. It's kind of a union of teams in some ways, to create Formula One management and create this body that would sell the rights, divide the spoils, license the races, etc. It just so happened that it would all be done through Bernie Ecclestone for 20 years. But the sport grew enormously. It all worked out. And before that, all these teams were just kind of showing up and doing racing and didn't really have any collective kind of bargaining power or media licensing power. And so fundamentally, that's why that organization exists, is to create a product that they could sell against and monetize effectively. And it really had nothing to do with putting on the races, because they were already, the races were already being put on, so it wasn't a thing they had to add to their list of responsibilities.
All right, next one comes from Daniel, who says, "Hey gents, I know you speedy boys are busy, so I'll get to the point. My local racetrack, at my local racetrack, the race director has radio access to all drivers in the track at all times. It's a quarter-mile track, so there are no spotters, except for the big races, so the race director is the only voice they hear. Does F1 have something like this, or should they? That way they can alert drivers to any marshals or safety team members on track clearing debris, recovering cars, etc. Of course, that means that officials in that section of the track would need to report it, but it seems better than throwing red flags left and right. Love the show. Keep up the great work." So, to my knowledge, the only person that can communicate with the driver is that driver's engineer. Or at least that is, I don't know that that's mandated by the rules, but that's how it goes. The race director can issue bulletins to the teams, but then it's the engineer's responsibility to relay that to the driver. They do have certain things that the race director can trigger, like I think something like a red flag or a virtual safety car will not only pop up on the light panels around the track, but on the steering wheel as well. But I don't think that extends to audio for the drivers. And I think they do this to bring it back to the Apollo program. They did it similarly, where everything went through the Capcom, the capsule communicator. And that was one guy who himself was an astronaut, who knew how to talk to the astronauts as the filter to make sure that, nothing, they wouldn't get overwhelmed with conflicting information. So everything would go through one person so that they could simplify and filter for the driver in this case. What do you think, Rob? Sound right?
It does, and I never actually looked up what Capcom meant. I just heard them say it in like the movie Apollo 13 and stuff. We need Capcom to weigh in or stuff like that. And I'm like, venerable fighting game company and Japanese publisher Capcom.
That is
what
Capsule
do they have
Computers, I believe.
That's
Yes.
the origins of that. Okay.
All right, Rob, this next one from Burton in Colorado.
Hey, y'all, with the recent talks of ways to change the Formula One weekend, if you could institute one change without worry of logistics, what would you want to see tried? I have no idea if this would work, but I would love to see the starting grid for a race be determined by the reverse order of the previous race. So P20 becomes the number 1 spot on the grid, P19, number 2, P18, number 3, and so on. If you could try any idea, what would you want to see happen? I love reverse grid races. Love them to pieces. So I think someone needs to have the nerve in the racing world to just do this as a matter of course. I think it's an easier pill to swallow if you are running 2 races a weekend. I will say that.
Yeah.
Because then you can still reward teams for like, yep, you got good pole, you're the leading team, you get the race where you reap all the benefits of that, and then we have, we do one fun one where we sort of mix things up.
How about this? The cars keep the same grid spots, but the drivers are in reverse positions. So you get Max Verstappen in an AlphaTauri. You get Lewis Hamilton in a Williams.
So much. They would never do it. They would never.
No, they would not.
Talk about questions you don't want answered, right?
My God, Nicholas Latifi is cleaning up.
Can you imagine if Nicholas Latifi just got hold, like George Russell almost got hold of championship winning Mercedes,
yeah,
and Nicholas Latifi just smokes everybody, and suddenly people are looking at Hamilton's 6 championships and oh shit, are those real? And then maybe not, but then you have to ask the next question: are any of them real from the meritocratic standpoint? Can we make any definitive statements? And we could if we adopted the car swap idea, which I adore. Yeah, I think Gosh, those are such strong ideas.
You could do reverse races, like around the track in reverse, the opposite way, or put the cars in reverse and race them that way.
A demo derby, yeah, for sure.
There's Bernie's sprinkler idea.
Bernie's sprinkler idea has a lot of merit. I like that one. You know, I mean, they're trying the sprint races thing, and like if the theory, like, it just doesn't generate reliably compelling racing, right? Like, there have been some weekends where we said, I'm glad the sprint race happened. It made it a more fun weekend. And then there've been ones where I'm like, I could have done without that. And so I think that's where it gets complicated. I think for me, I would love give them worse tire compounds. Like, maybe this is just me just being high on IndyCar right now. This whole C0 through C5 system with different tire compounds, we sort of dial in based on circumstances. The hell with that. They get 2 tires. You know what? Maybe only 1 compound. And they just use that at every circuit. And at some circuits, it'll be great. At some circuits, it'll be crap. And you just have to like design around, you have to just like set up your car around that. And I think that would really draw fun things out of the sport. Because, like, if we're not going to race on as wide a variety of surfaces as, like, IndyCar does, the least we can do is, like, give them the same sort of, like, sometimes the tire just sucks. And there is no good tire to be had. You just have to deal with that. I would enjoy that.
Yeah. Or dirt tracks, you know, like NASCAR does.
Yeah.
Cover this whole circuit in dirt. All right. This next one comes from Tim, who says, hey, folks, I've gotten a good understanding of most things F1 during my roughly 2 years of watching and listening, but there's at least one thing that still confounds me on the regular. What's up with the commentator audio playing on top of an unrelated video feed during parts of the qualifying broadcast? This usually occurs during the short breaks between Q1, Q2, Q3 sessions, and I think we typically get to hear Sam Collins talking about something he's definitely seeing on a screen, say an overtake, but which doesn't match up with what we're seeing on the broadcast, which is usually some footage from the garages or something. Why don't they just show the related video footage? Am I missing something obvious? I feel like I must be. Hope you shed some light on this terribly minor thing, or at least let me know I'm not the only one who has noticed this. All the best from Sweden, Tim. Tim does point out that he is watching the international feed using the F1 TV app on Apple TV, and therein lies the answer. So, Tim, what the international feed is actually the Sky TV audio. Crucially, the F1 TV app does not show you the Sky TV video. When you watch Sky TV on the Sky TV channel or on ESPN, which is a rebroadcast of the Sky TV's video feed, you're right, they do have a guy. It's not Sam Collins. He's part of the F1 TV team. It's usually Anthony Davidson or maybe Karun Chandok, who are both with the Sky team, commentating and telestrating their own TV screen. So Sky cuts away from the F1 official broadcast to their own camera and TV while that is happening. So if you want things that are more synchronized to the F1 official broadcast, don't use the international feed in the audio. I think it's called F1 Live. I forget what it's actually called. I think it's what it actually defaults to in the F1 TV app. So that is...
This drove me up a wall during
They don't explain testing. It. How would you know?
Well, and also, like, I guess I understand why they can't, like, Sky TV has their own rights. It's kind of a weird thing, but I want to see Anthony Davidson standing in front of his big touchscreen and, like, do the spinny thing to play the frames and the spinny thing the other way to see the frames go the other way. Like, I want to see it all. And that you don't get access to that, but you can still get the audio. And it's like, cool editorial insert goes here is really frustrating.
Yeah. Rob, you want to take this second to last one here from Brendan?
Yeah. Hey, shifters, are we on a break until Azerbaijan, like the summer break, where teams are forbidden to work on the car? Or is the gap one where a bunch of changes could be worked on with drivers handcuffed to the simulator? Brendan. So this is not a you can't touch the car break. That is the summer break has that rule sort of set in stone so that people actually get a vacation. This is that's pretty ironclad, because the minute you opened it to, well, you don't have to take a vacation if you want to. If you're just so passionate about F1, you want to work through break. What do you know? Everyone's going to be working through break. So they take a full, factories close. Nobody can touch the car, any of that. This is just, they're supposed to be racing. There's a race contracted for this gap. As we alluded to, China. It hasn't happened, for a number of years now. And otherwise, they would be working and they would be racing. So this has become a pretty sizable development gap. But I don't think they've put in any sort of restriction on what you can do during this era, except for the fact that they do have they ration your ability to do certain types of development work. So in addition to the cost cap the teams have to observe, they are limited in how much time they get running aerodynamic simulations. Running wind tunnels, etc. So even with a big gap like this, they still have to be very judicious about how much development work they put in.
Well said. All right. And finally, this email that I'm going to call computer numerical controller beef from Ben. Hey there. I've started listening to your show this season, and you're by far my favorite F1 podcast. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for what you're doing. I love it. I did have a gripe about the letter you read aloud about the accuracy of Haas CNC machines, and I wanted to set the record straight. I have been manufacturing with Haas equipment for over a decade now. I've done programming and machining of prototype and high production parts. I got my start in my college as a machinist for the Formula SAE team, and my first job out of school was developing and building out the manufacturing capabilities of a two-piece racing brake motor manufacturer in the Pacific Northwest, which makes iron replacements for anything with Brembo brake calipers on it. I now own a small machine shop with a Haas vertical mill and lathe. A standard, quote, off-the-shelf Haas mill's resolution is 1/10,000th of an inch, or 0.0025 millimeters. The quote you read said Haas machines can only hold 5 thou, and that is just not true. Haas is not considered the most rigid in the industry for the best 24/7 production, but they are really, really good pieces of equipment for burgeoning manufacturers and big production facilities alike. They also have an amazing online repository of troubleshooting and repair guides for all of their machines, which benefits the small shops, where machines like DMG Mori or Mazak have absolutely nothing available, and you have to rely on the service in your area for any support. Haas gets talked about negatively often in the industry, but it's often by people who spent too much money for what they needed and have a superiority complex about it. Ooh. Anyway, thanks again for your excellent show. Cheers, Ben.
Well, Ben wants a piece of that other emailer.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I will also say, I don't even know if we can fully trust Ben, because we had many people write in with their various takes on the CNC, power rankings and who's good at what. Somebody was like, no, if you pause this one Mercedes video they shot in their factory, there's a Haas machine in the background doing stuff. So clearly it's used for something. Probably somebody wrote in that it can sometimes come down to what materials you're working with. That some more sophisticated / expensive materials you just don't want a Haas machine working on. But it was, I don't know if this is the most controversial topic we've ever had outside of a big racing controversy, but I think it has to be up there.
Yeah, please write in with your hot CNC takes. Those are the emails, shift.f1podcast@gmail.com or f1.cool/emails. You can also hit us up on the socials with the links in the show notes. That's us around the various spots on the internet. Shall we take it around the world of racing, Rob?
I would love to. Did we actually do the list the races thing? I didn't look anything up.
Oh, I did. It's pretty easy. They're all added to a... By the way, if you too would like to race around the world yourself, toomuchracing.com has Google Calendar and iCal invites for nearly every racing series you can think of. And basically what I have done, this is some behind the scenes stuff, is just added all of them to a Google Calendar. So if you'd like to do that yourself, you can go to toomuchracing.com. I'll put that in the show notes as well. But this weekend we have the World Rally Championship in Zagreb for the Croatia Rally. We've also got the World Superbike Championship at TT Circuit Assen in the Netherlands. Formula E is at the Tempelhof Airport for the Berlin E-Prix. The NASCAR Xfinity Series is at Dega, the Talladega Superspeedway for the Ag Pro 300. Super Formula is at Suzuka Circuit, which, by the way, is in the city of Suzuka in the Mie Prefecture. And we got NASCAR. They're also at those hallowed Talladega grounds, racing at the Geico 500. You're going to need some car insurance when you're rubbing and racing.
At Talladega? The place where they shot Talladega Nights?
The very same, Rob.
Where Ricky Bobby shaked and baked?
Uh-huh. We have a film review of Talladega Nights if you'd like to subscribe to the Patreon. Patreon.com/shiftf1. It's great. That movie has
some good sketches.
It really does. Final thoughts, Rob, at the end of our news/email episode.
It was fun. I enjoyed, just shooting the shit, going through some great email questions, some great stuff to work through. It was fun. I like this whole more relaxed F1 season. It's kind of a glimpse of like what a more rational calendar might look like in terms of like the pace and flow of the season. I enjoyed, just from the standpoint of like doing the show, I enjoyed having like a little bit of a third type of show that we got a chance to do here.
It's true. Well, if you would like to support this show and get access to all those bonus episodes we mentioned and the official Shift F1 Discord, you can do so over at patreon.com/shiftf1. Have a good race weekend, everyone. We will see you all next week.